let's dive in. We have four panelists tonight, starting with Hurimoana Dennis. Huri, could you give us a wave so everybody can see you? There we go. Hurimoana is the chairperson of the Te Puea Memorial Marae, a marae-based emergency housing initiative. He's also worked in law enforcement for 30 years, most recently as the National Maori Strategy Advisor for the Aotearoa Police. And I think he wears a few other hats too. And I think just after I'm done with introductions, maybe Uri, you can take it away and share a little bit more about what you do. Helen Robinson is joining us. Helen is the city missioner and also the chief executive of the Auckland City Mission, which is a century-old nonprofit that serves needy communities, families, and individuals in Tamaki Makaurau in all kinds of ways. Actually, the mission, if I understand correctly, the mission has its roots in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. So I think we're coming full circle here. And we're really excited to have you here with us tonight, Helen. And then we have Lunar Tong and Jennifer Kwong from Catering Care in Hong Kong, joining us from across the ocean. Catering Care is a student-run initiative that emerged during the pandemic to serve needy people in Hong Kong. And Luna and Jennifer bring really incredible on-the-ground experience to us in how their organization emerged and how it responded to the pandemic. So these are our four panelists. Very excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for taking the time. We're very grateful that you will be able to share your insights and experience with us. Now tonight, we'll be talking about collective prosperity. It's a topic that kind of seems absolutely clear the first time I heard it, and then it got more and more complex the more I read about it. It hints at a rethinking of who is responsible for social progress and how we can all contribute to it. It's made huge strides in the pandemic and perhaps calls all of us more than ever to work out how to make this idea of collective prosperity happen and what it even is. There don't seem to be a lot of answers yet about what it means and how we can bring it to life, but I'm hoping that our panel tonight will shed some light from their experience and their insight and take us all forward just a little bit in how we can understand this theme of collective prosperity. So, you didn't come here to hear me blabber on about something I know nothing about. So, Hurimoana, would you be able to take it away, give us a little bit of an intro into who you are and your work and your perspective on this?
Ai tēnā tātou e te whare, nunihi rā kia koutou I tēnei wāhu tātou. Thank you very much for inviting me on, Helen, and to all of you, whānau, for coming along and on Zoom talking about a very important kaupapa, which is why I'm here, because the social impact that we want to have as a collaboration is important to me. So just a little bit about me. I was in the police for 32 years and I got to the rank of inspector and I was the National Māori Strategic Advisor for the police. I retired in 2018, had a bit of a tangle with my organisation, but that's life. You can't do much about that. Anyway, I got through that, but in a parallel life, I was also the chair of Te Puea Memorial Marae and currently the chair of PARS. I'm also a member of the Kahungungu National Trust Board. And I also chair a group called Taumata Kōrero that I'll talk a little bit more about perhaps a little bit later on. Having said all of that, currently I'm at Te Puea, as I said, and to date we've put 538 whānau into homes, Māori, Pacific, ethnic and Pākehā whānau, really taking them from the start to the beginning, through the back door, out the backyard and beyond. Our philosophy around care goes beyond just the system and process to the point where we get invited to birthdays, family gatherings, and we can turn up at their homes at any time and get invited in for a cup of tea. We think this is very important when it comes to engagement. We also have a model of co-location of MSD and kind order staff. And I have to say that set the precedent for MSD across Auckland. So there's about 18 MSD staff co-located at different maraes to do what they do better, but sitting next to Māori Kaimahi. The philosophy around that e Tātou Mā was on Monday and Tuesday we were there with MSD, Thursday and Friday they're at the marae seeking help. So we run a number of other things inside of that at Te Puea, but the learnings inside of that is that a model that has a good blend of LAW and LORE can do a lot more better together. So bringing me closer to the story of collaboration and in fact the impact of the pandemic that's happened on us here for the last 15, well, how many weeks, and recently moving into the traffic light system has been a learning curve, I'd say, all on its own. So I chair a group called Taumata Kōrero, which involves the 3 MSD commissioners, MOH commissioners, MOE commissioners, TPK regional directors, NRHCC, Kāinga Order, so on and so forth. And they sit next to and work with 13 big Māori providers across Tāmaki from Te Hana all the way down to Port Waikato. And it's a mixture of iwi and mana whenua, whānau ora providers, kohanga reo, kura kaupapa, Māori, urban Māori maraes, kāinga kore whānau and organisations. And we've been meeting for the last 15 weeks or however long the pandemic's been going on, and I have to say, e Tātou Mā, that's been a learning experience all by itself. Having the Crown and Māori sitting in the same tent, doing some good together is quite a challenge all on its own. But to date, we've delivered 45 tonnes worth of kai, over $1.5 million worth of food vouchers, and set up the first Māori food network that supports whānau across Tāmaki and Makaurau. We've also hit out on a Māori youth rangatei strategy around vaccinations called Ira Dot, which is the screen that you have behind me, Ira Kati Ira Dot. And long story short, the young ones are saying 30-year-older chaps need to get out of the way because the narratives around what you're telling everybody just isn't right. We presented that to the ministers, and a couple of them didn't actually understand what the young ones were saying. And the more they didn't understand, the more we knew we were right on the money. We also have another program running at the moment that's funded by MOE, and it is called Ngā Oho Ake, which is about waking up the tamariki mokopuna rangatei to go back to school, in fact, to get out of the house. MOE came to us and saying, listen, we want to get kids back to school. And we suggested, no, you've got to wake them up first. We want to go to the classroom. And we related our own personal experiences with our own kids. So that's an ongoing program that's being led by Ira Dot. Ira Dot is another narrative around reaching out to and into a lot of our whānau that haven't been dotted. So they've equated the jab to the word dot. And I'm not allowed to use jab or shot or anything like that anymore. And a lot of our Māori personalities and rangatei have come on board to move that online. The latest scope of that we've got is called noho tapu, which is our word for self-isolation in the homes. So right now we've got 1,100 whānau in noho tapu scenarios across our sites. We have a program in a philosophy that regardless about where you are, how you are, where you've come from, somebody needs to knock at the door. Doesn't always have to be a doctor or a clinician. Somebody needs to knock at the door and say, listen, are you guys okay? It's all good. Don't worry. Here's what's coming. Tell us about the whānau so we know how we can help you. We've gone past 10 days in Tātou Mā. We've crossed it and worked it out to about a 30-day hit out. A lot of our whānau are big families, have a crowded home, struggling for food and kai. And this has the attention of ministers, and we expect to get a big chunk of money to help us do that. I'm telling you all of this, e Tātou Mā, because the collaboration with the community groups, the Crown, Māori groups has been critical and important and has allowed us to do what we've done. So across our sites, we've plotted 120,000 whānau, tested 65,000 whānau for dots. And now, as I said, we've got 1,100 noho tapu whānau on our books across all the marae. This would not have happened unless the collaboration and the goodwill amongst us all was what it needed to be. So if you could imagine the Crown sitting at the table with Māori providers, and we all have a view of the same thing, all going different ways, the way we've been able to achieve that is by collaborating. So when you talk about the impact that pandemic has had on whānau, it's been huge, but it's gone way past what it is now, and it'll impact on us for the next 10 to 20. In terms of individuals and businesses, we've also reached out to a lot of the Māori businesses and businesses in particular to help them get a foothold in the funding regime. And of course, the last part around being a protagonist in this environment, I can think of a few words that describe protagonists, and I've been named a few. But at the end of the day, you know, everybody, you can achieve things if you want to. You don't need to be rude about it, okay? My job in Taumata Kōrero and everything I do is almost like a conductor, to make people feel comfortable, being able to consult, being able to talk, speak freely, and get some things done. Somebody asked me one day what I did for a living, and I said to them, I'm the general manager of the Personalities, Egos and Territories department. If you can't understand some of those things that are going on in your communities, the leadership that comes together and all the rest of it, then you'll spend the rest of your day and possibly the weeks after trying to articulate what you actually heard and how you're going to get everybody to the finish line.
Yeah,
that's really where I am at the moment. So I hope that's a bit of a background to where I'm at the moment, and I'm happy to answer any questions when the time is right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Huri. I think from what I hear, partnerships and collaboration seem to be really at the heart of what you do. And I think something many of us have experienced in how hard and complex it is to do. I'd love to dive deep back into that. And you also spoke to the power of personal connection, and that is sometimes lost, especially during a pandemic, right? Knocking on people's doors is something that's become rare, and how essential it still is in doing this kind of work. Thank you so much. Helen, would you be able to give us some background into the Auckland City Mission, your journey there, and what you guys are up to now?
Kia ora, Nishan. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Robinson, tōku ingoa, ko ahau te manutaki o te tāpui atawhai. So my name is Helen Robinson, and it's a genuine pleasure to be with you all here tonight. I am the Auckland City Missioner, or we're just having a discussion before about the fact that I'm both the Missioner and the Chief Executive, and just coming to understand a little bit about what those two different roles might mean, and I'll talk to that in a minute. Hurimoana, I do want to acknowledge you and all the whānau who are there with you, both at Te Puea and then through Taumata Kōrero. Certainly the mission has stood in awe of you, actually, and the work that you have done and do. And it's lovely to have a bit of time with you here tonight too. So I do just want to acknowledge coming right after you here. And thank you everyone actually for your welcome tonight. The mission, as Nishan introduced, is 101 years old. So we founded here in Central City, Auckland, by a man called Jasper Calder, as Nishan said, in the middle of the pandemic in Auckland. Jasper Calder was a priest, part of the Anglican Church, and I think the church both loved and tolerated Jasper, for, to quote you, Hurimoana, for his protagonist style and point of view. And I think, if I was very honest with you, a part of me says, they said, why don't you have that mission job to kind of keep you away so that we don't have to worry about you too much, because he just kept kind of talking and kept raising the issues about what was going on in Auckland at the time, and actually very interestingly, very humbly started as an ambulance driver during that pandemic, really wanting to literally get his hands in and respond to the reality of desperation that he saw. And in so doing, he kind of laid a challenge or a taki down for the mission, and ever since in that 101 years, and certainly to me as missioner, to be deeply listening to what is happening across Tāmaki, and particularly listening deeply to what is the face and the shape and the reality of desperation in our city, and then asked us to respond. So each generation and each time of the mission is what we do is quite different. So it's not that we're actually based on any one particular issue, but actually more at a much deeper issue, much deeper level, called to respond to where desperation exists, to where people are being left out, to where people are being made unimportant, to where people are being pushed to the edges and silenced. And so a big part of my role was to be listening deeply to that face now. So we do three kind of general areas of work. We're often known quite well for our work with people who are experiencing homelessness. So we started working with people who were rough sleeping, so people living without shelter in central city Auckland here about 30 years ago, unbelievably. And at that time, there was a very few rough sleepers or people experiencing homelessness. And actually, since that time, 30 years ago, the latest data that we have is that 40,000 people in New Zealand are experiencing one kind of homelessness. And that has grown significantly. And in fact, I mark the change of the tide to what happened at Te Puea. So I do genuinely acknowledge you and your whānau and what they did. So there was an incredible winter, I want to say 7 years ago, but I could have my dates slightly wrong, 6, 7, 8 years ago, where Te Puea Marae opened up their doors and said, whānau, come, we know that you are suffering, we can see your homelessness. And through that, it really caused, it was a tipping point, which caused the government to come into partnership and to listen. And from that point, much resource actually has unfolded. And that certainly supports much of the work that we're doing now. So we have a team of people who go out on the streets every day in the morning and at night, literally to know people by name and understand in central city Auckland what's going on here. We provide access to people for emergency accommodation. We have our own transitional housing facilities. We support people into permanent housing, and we're a couple of months away, or maybe even 6 weeks away, of opening our facility called Home Ground, which is a very special facility to provide permanent housing for people, particularly those who are very, very, very who have high and complex needs. So this is really our offering and our gift to Tāmaki Makaurau to say, we can't solve this problem, but certainly this is what we will do for our bit. So that speaks to some of our homelessness stuff. Every day too, we have a service called Haiata, which loosely translates as the dawn or the breaking of the dawn, where we welcome everyday people who do not have access to food or kai, who are living on the street or very vulnerably housed. And that's open every day of the year, including during a pandemic. And you may be surprised to know that we can have sometimes over 300 people through here in a 3-hour period. I'm speaking to you from our base in 23 Union Street. So people just coming for food because they don't have access to that. And that also means that we can provide a range of other services, including healthcare, which is another big part of what we do. So we have a primary medical healthcare centre here. So super important to be able to have that. So to be doing the vaccination and the testing. And we've had a medical centre here, particularly working with people who are experiencing homelessness for about the last 15 years. And it's incredibly powerful to have access to medical services for people who are so traumatized and have suffered so deeply of often people's physical health and our mental health, and actually at that deepest level of wairoa is deeply harmed. So to be able to have health services that respond appropriately and can be connected in. So people often come in for a kai, and then that gives us an opportunity to say, hello, how are you? And then through that conversation actually start saying, would you like to see a nurse? Would you like to see a doctor? What can we do to help? We have a social detox unit based in Avondale at the moment, but we'll come home when we open up our new building. And that's one of 2 detox units across Auckland. Most people think that for people experiencing homelessness, and it is, but of our 10 beds at any one time, there is only 1 person in there who's experiencing homelessness. So that's actually open for all of Auckland. So 15% of us have an alcohol or any other drug problem, and we have a major shortage or recognition of the need that alcohol and drug addiction and the problems that it brings. So that's such an important service that we offer. And then finally, a little bit like Huri, as he spoke before, we have a major response to food security. So hundreds of thousands of people in our country each day do not have access to enough good kai. And I often talk about that food and our understanding of food is about 10 years behind our understanding of housing. So I genuinely feel like our country is in denial about the hunger crisis that I have gone on record to speak about before. So I believe 20% of New Zealand today does not have access to enough money for enough good kai. There was the Ministry of Health put out stats in 2015, 2016 saying that 1 in 5 New Zealand children in 2015 did not have access to enough good food. So, and we do that in partnership with 3 marae, so at Manurewa Marae, at Papakura Marae, at Ngā Whare in Favona, and also in our own site here in the city. So there's lots of good work that we're doing with food. Naishan, when you open this, I'm really pleased that you said that you didn't know much about collective prosperity. I'm telling you, I've been feeling worried all day. What wise and incredible things am I going to say about something I know very little about? The place that lent me was to two places, and then I can go to our next people. I don't think we can view prosperity as a singular and certainly not a material good. It takes us deep to a Māori concept that we call hauora. So deep to well-being that is complete and whole and relational, that takes us through time, both to our children and to our ancestors. And is truly holistic. So we are not prosperous, and we consciously use that word we, unless the whole of us are prosperous. Particularly there's interesting concepts of both I and we in that. And I think that takes me to the second point. There was a quote of Mother Teresa that certainly sits with me deeply that says that where there is poverty, it's because we have forgotten we belong to each other. And I think poverty speaks deeply to that lack of belonging. And I think the pandemic has shown us, if nothing else, very, very, very intrinsically, my health and well-being is intimately linked to your health and well-being. We are not separate. We are not disconnected, although I think much of certainly the Western world and the moneyed world would like to portray that. So, certainly what I heard Huri talk about, and certainly what we live here at the mission, or attempt to live very humbly, is we actually do belong to each other. And your wellness is intimately linked to my wellness. And we have some problems because there are some of us who are missing out. And often that some of us is linked to gender or is linked to ethnicity. That speaks to some much deeper issues that are going on in our society about colonisation, about racism, about sexism, about the devaluing of parenting. And these are the deep, deep issues that drive the reality and certainly the need for services like the mission. So I look forward to hearing the wisdom that will come after this as we really discover together what collective prosperity is. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou.
Thank you, Helen. I think you have a very clear view of what's happening in Tamaki and how the winds have shifted over time. And as you say, how people have been made to feel unimportant. Hopefully in the course of this conversation, we can also point a shining light into where we should go together. Now, we've had 2 panelists who can share with us the experience from Aotearoa, and luckily we also have panelists who will show us the experience in another part of the world. So Luna and Jennifer are so excited to have you. It would be wonderful to hear about your incredible organization, Catering Care, and when you emerged and how you emerged.
So good evening, good afternoon, and good day to everyone who's here with us. So today, thanks to my friend Emily's invitation, Jennifer and I are very happy to be here, not just to have the opportunities to learn from you all, but also to share with you our community project that is based in Hong Kong. You might be curious about what is catering care and why we started this project. Actually, to locate the origin or the seed of our motivation, we have to, I have to talk about this particular restaurant first. It's called Beaches Vegetarian, a place that nourished me so well with its healthy and delicious vegetarian food, and also the positive energies from the environment and the people I'm meeting and connecting with here in the past 5 years. For some people, it is even longer. It provides the food in a pay by weight buffet style so that I grow my ideas of treasuring the food and reducing the food waste. It hires people of different abilities and the elderly so that I gradually appreciate more of their capabilities rather than the disabilities they are born with. It also offers a green dining environment that nourishes the seed of mindfulness in me. I can't cover all the meanings this plays to me, and not just to me actually, but also to many of others in this community and the neighborhood. And I believe in each of your community, there must exist or could exist restaurants like Beaches that not only provide food, but also a space for shared values to derive from the way we connect with food and each other. They are actually valuable community assets. So when the COVID-19 pandemic first happened, to be honest, there were just too many news out there that I didn't want to pay too much attention to because it caused a lot of frustrations and anxieties. But when the sad things really happening in my surrounding and to the people and places that I have close connections with, I just couldn't do nothing. The restaurant almost couldn't survive because there's nobody really coming to the campus. So many of us started to ask the manager of the Beaches, the Thomas, if we could fundraise to support the restaurant itself. And he responded, other people need the money more. It is not just a Beaches crisis, but a global crisis. So he had helped us to realize how we are encountering this crisis as a collective rather than individuals. We started to pay attention to other vulnerable groups like the homeless, the other small catering enterprises, and the unemployed. So with the struggles from both coming from both ends, we started to think, is it possible to make a win-win-win situation? Can we both support the restaurants, the food insecure, and also the community as a whole in this difficult time? So we start to propose ways to link up these three stakeholders and to look into the existing food partnership models in Hong Kong. And we found that although there are many NGOs in Hong Kong addressing food insecurity, few of them really unlock the potentials of catering enterprises. So here we propose this food partnership model, which is fundamentally built upon the trust and care within the community. We call for the community members that are less impacted to give care to those who suffer more. So for every 3 meals donated, the caterers help cook another one for free. That's why we also call this 3+1 model. So after 2 months preparations, we successfully made our first meal delivery using this 3+1 model. With a lot of supports, we were able to fundraise about like 7,000 Hong Kong dollars. So with this, we are able to purchase 200 meals from our partner restaurants. And with the help of student volunteers and also a community-based NGO, we are able to deliver these meals to the food insecure populations in our neighborhood. So through this process, every stakeholder gain in some way through giving, sharing, and caring, and a more connected and united community networks can be realized. The effect was just like ripples, like waving out from the position we are orienting and resonating and interacting with other beings. We are reshaping the community networks, but in turn, the networks are also reshaping us as community members. So of course, like any other organizations, we are facing the challenges of sustainability, which we'll be happy to discuss with other panelists, the host and the other audiences here later. So initially, we just wanted to support one, but end up to connect with more. I can't say it specifically how much influence we are bringing in, but definitely we are receiving a lot of support from a lot of people. We regard catering care as a collective endeavor of our longing for caring, sharing in this moment of uncertainty. So that's all for my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You know, I think the vast majority of people see the pain in our communities. And it's so inspiring that you decided to actually do something about it practically. And beyond that, how you've designed this incredible model with a win-win-win relationship that not only supports people in the community, but really also builds community. We, you know, we really should be diving a little bit into understanding more specifically what the situation is. You know, many of us read the news. We kind of have a somewhat good understanding of what's happening in society, but still we all operate in our own bubbles. And I thought, while we have you all here, we could use this opportunity to look a little bit at how the pandemic has affected underprivileged individuals and communities. You know, what is it that you're seeing at the grassroots? Maybe speaking to some of the misconceptions that wider society may have about the underprivileged, or some of the surprising things that you've seen happen during the pandemic. If you can tell us specific stories about families or individuals that help us grasp a little bit of how this actually comes to life. I wonder, Huri, whether you could start us off and speak a little bit in terms of your experience and what you're seeing at the grassroots.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you everybody for sharing your stories as well. And look, if the question is a specific one around the impact that the pandemic and maybe underprivileged has had on people, more so Maori, is look, we were struggling before the pandemic, we're struggling during the pandemic, and we'll be struggling after the pandemic. I'd suggest too that Maori as a people, unfortunately, not in a good state, not all of us. And as a result of that, we're finding ourselves being reliant on the state. And there's no mana in that. But that finds its origins in colonisation many, many years back. Okay, we've arrived at this point where we have a system that has, in some ways, enabled whānau to become dependent on the state. And there's no position of mana or tapu when it comes to that. Having said all of that, we also have a wide number of organisations, Māori inclusive, that all have a view on the next steps and the solutions around that. And I have to tell you, some of our whānau are well treated by 4 or 5 different agencies, getting quite a few things from quite a few different sources. And when you get a situation like that, why would you want to change? What I am suggesting here at Tātou Mā is that there needs to be a point in time within a family, in the family unit in particular, you need to find those gems of how to break that generational welfare state dependency. We sort of partially started a program called Flowers and Prickles at Te Puea. And look, a long story short, some of the parents that came to us were just too far gone, too hard to change and very much stuck in their ways. But they had kids, rangatahi mokopuna, who actually had a bit of hope. And we focused on getting them, supporting them to a degree where they ended up starting to be the parents of the house. So we did this with one young man, and quite simply, we found him a job as a roofer. And I remember when I went over to the home to have a chat to the mum and the kids, it was one of the hardest discussions I had to have, to be honest, with the family around Flowers and Prickles. Luckily, the mum picked up on it. She said to me, "Huri, are you calling me a prickle?" And I said, "You are a very big prickle. And your son is your hope with a flower." And he didn't like being called a flower either, to be honest. But what work was doing for him was he was bringing money home, helping his younger siblings, helping out with the food, giving his mum some money, and just placing a bit of hope inside the family. And he was only 17. But the history of the family is unlike everybody else that we get. It's quite strong in terms of in and out of jail. And we come with that environment, and it's not pretty. So the stories are real, and that's just one of many. But how do we get into that? We need to go right back to the beginning with per family, line by line, bringing them out of the state of dependency. Because if we don't do that, they're just going to keep repeating things. So that's where I'm at with flowers and pickles, Neijan, e tātou mā. It can work with anyone, but I have to tell you, it's a big piece of work. You've got to find a very special person. He asked me, this guy that I got, how do I know that this is all working? And I'm starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. And I said, you'll know when you start getting invited around for dinner. You'll know when you'll start getting invited for birthdays. You'll know when you are feeling part of that family, going to activities that only exist for that family. The big question is, once you're there, what are you going to do? Okay, and that's not an easy question to ask. So that's my experience in terms of, that's the best one I'd like to give you fellas, because at the end of the day, you can write up as many flash proposals as you possibly want and tell everybody, you know, here's the idea, but we just got on with it and put it into motion. Flowers and Prickles, the name of the program, always catches people's attention. We could probably think of better names to give it, but it's the best way that sort of describes what we're dealing with. And that actually reflects a lot of the families that come to us at Te Puea. So can't stop, just have to keep going, but trying to find those special people to employ, to bring them on, to give them the free reign of their families is the hardest part. All the rest is quite simple, but they're very special people. Thank you.
Helen, are you seeing similar things?
Totally. COVID has only exacerbated pre-existing realities, but I think to Hiri's point, they were already pre-existing. So hundreds of thousands of people in New Zealand before COVID didn't have enough money for food. They truly were suffering the reality of food insecurity, and COVID has just exacerbated that or made it worse, but that already existed, and people certainly were experiencing homelessness before and are now. And people struggle to get access to appropriate healthcare, and you know that's become very loud and clear. I think particularly in the whole kind of vaccination and conversation, and I think will also become clear in the people isolating at home conversation. Just how do we respond and who misses out? I think it's a really, really important question that I'm often asking is who is not at the table. We had an experience the other day of actually a young woman who used to live on the street and is actually doing pretty well now by and large. She is indoors and has a partner and 3 children. And a couple of days ago, her 4-year-old was very unwell. So she lives in about 10 k's from the mission here. And brought her 4-year-old in, and he was tested. And then literally on Friday, her 4-year-old, her partner, her baby, and her 2-year-old had literally walked from their address because she knew her 4-year-old really was unwell. And actually that day had just tested positive. And she came to us literally saying, we don't know what else to do. We don't know where else to go. Help us, please. And it was quite a key moment for us here at the mission because a 4-year-old is COVID positive. We truly cannot leave that whānau out on the doorstep. So we very, very quickly just worked out how we can bring them inside safely so that they can be safe and that they can have access to kai in the bathroom and be sheltered until we can actually get the appropriate people to support them. And in this instance, it was best that they went as a whānau to MIQ. But that whole process took about 7 hours. So it's a really, really, really good example of actually an extraordinary family who has overcome incredible odds yet, like all of us, has a moment of desperation and needs help and support. And, the reason they walked here is that they thought that their child was COVID positive and they didn't want to put any taxi driver or Uber driver or whānau member at risk further. So it was a very generous act on their behalf, actually, and that required of us great generosity or manaakitanga in response to, actually. So those kind of details are the reality that we're dealing with here at the mission. How do we truly welcome someone who is COVID positive within our doors? Or we have a very tricky situation. Our service at Haiata, I want to open up on Saturday morning. The reality, though, would be is that it's most appropriate people come in, that they sit down, that they have a cooked meal, that we have a chance to be in relationship with them and then get to access those social and health services. But under the current alert level red rules, that will only happen if 100% of those people are vaccinated. And we believe about 75% of our people are vaccinated, but it's also quite complex for this population because a vaccinating certificate requires you to have an email, requires you to have internet, requires you to have access to a phone or a computer at some point. And perhaps you do have a phone today, but you don't tomorrow. Or perhaps you download a piece of paper today, but then you lose that piece of paper. And all these very real pragmatics mean that we would stop people accessing our services. So we have quite a challenge on our hands at the moment, that we're trying to do all kinds of things to support people to get vaccinations and that much bigger education process, but actually deeply welcome the unvaccinated person as part of the mission. And respond and create services appropriately, and at the same time welcome the COVID positive person within our door safely. So it's just complicating things. COVID's adding another layer, but to Huri's point, stuff was complicated before.
Yeah. I wonder, Jennifer, what is your perspective on this? You have a different lens, a different country, a different community. Are you seeing similar things? What does it look like in Hong Kong?
Actually, interestingly, we would say that Helen's point and Huri's point pretty much resonate with our own, in that some of these underlying problems have already existed before the pandemic, but have suddenly emerged massively during the pandemic. So especially concerning, I think, besides restaurants, which we've mentioned, with small and medium restaurants like Bejas that are suffering in their sales as compared to larger corporations, but also from our perspective, especially concerning school children, the ones that are from less privileged families, because on one hand, they're already falling behind in their education when classes have become online, and they are struggling with getting the right devices and scheduling when their parents are outside and they need technical support and all that. And on the other hand, kids who come from more privileged backgrounds, of course, have access to all sorts of additional educational support. Yeah. And I personally have seen a lot of this because one of my family members is actually a tutor, and interestingly, their business have gone up because of COVID, and they've engaged in a lot of additional online classes, but almost exclusively for the kids who are more well off. And so in that sense, we've also branched out our services to not just to provide food for the body, but also food for the spirit, in terms of offering free educational support to those children in need. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's amazing to see these parallels. And I think if we had people here from other countries in the world, we'd probably see the same. That this has added, as you say, Helen, a layer of complexity, that people need not just material sustenance, they also need other kinds of sustenance. And maybe that's an opportunity for us to look at this idea of collective prosperity. What does that actually mean? Helen, you touched on this when you spoke about prosperity not being material only, right? It points to this deeper well-being, that's something for us to explore. There's this quotation from Baha'u'llah, who is the founder of the Baha'i faith, and he wrote, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." It's a reminder of how we're all connected, and how without unity and collaboration, prosperity is impossible. I wonder, Helen, whether you could speak a little bit more about your thoughts on this topic. What does collective prosperity mean to you? What does it mean that it's not material? What are some of the other spiritual, moral building blocks that we could explore?
No worries.
Easy going. It's
yeah,
the
no
easiest
dramas.
question.
Yeah. I'll whip that done in 30 seconds and then we'll all be over. I think it takes me to a place that says, what do we as the human family need to flourish? And so I think that, like you've said, it takes me deeply to this well-being, this place of well-being that is about me and us, but is about us and me, and that dance. So I think it immediately takes us to a place of relationships. So I am only well if we are well, and we is only well if I am well. And that wellness has to be about all the parts of me at the level of my spirituality, so the wairoa, my whānau, my family, my body, my tinana, my hinengaro, my mind, the wholeness of me. And I think, as I said before, links us back both to my history, so those who are behind me, as well as those who are to come. When I was made city missioner at the Porphyry, there was a challenge that was laid down to me by a man called Bishop Kito, who was a great Maori bishop, who said that the decisions that I make, he wanted them to be honourable and prosperous for people for 5 generations ahead of me. So that I had to think of the city missioner in 100 years' time. And so when we get to that much deeper level, actually, material well-being kind of comes and goes and is almost so irrelevant on one level. It becomes very relevant when we don't have access to it. And actually much of what I've heard Luna and Jennifer and Huri and myself talk tonight is actually about what happens when people don't have access to it. And so it becomes that first layer, really. But then below that, and I think that's a little bit what Huri was talking about, that kind of intergenerational stuff. Below that, there is a much deeper sense. And I think what I was just echoing before, when I spoke about that quote of Mother Teresa, is that my well-being or my prosperity is intimately linked to yours. And it really, really interests me that the spirit level in that book that actually looked at the gap between the rich and the poor acknowledged that societies where there is a large gap between people who have a lot and people who don't are actually those that are the most unwell, where there is the most civil unrest, where there is the most discontent. Because actually this is about our related prosperity too. We have real problems when some of us have some and many of us have little. And unfortunately, more and more and more, that is the Aotearoa that we're living in, the country that some people are getting more and more. So I think that prosperity actually at a very deep level challenges those of us who have to let go and to give so that others might have.
Thank you, Helen. Luna, I wonder, you started catering care, and that was probably because you had some of this yearning for a deeper well-being for others. I wonder whether you can speak to this and what it means to you.
What Helen just shared it's just beautiful and poetic. I mean, it's just like poem, and like also like I especially like resonate with what she has just mentioned, like our own well-being is intimately closely like related with other people's well-being, and actually where does the boundary between our and other, or me and you, lies in. Like sometimes it's us like deliberately, maybe we draw a line between you and me, and so that we become divided. And so by kind of initially, I mean, before starting catering care, I mean, I'm not a person of like very keen on paying attention to social issues. This project is, you can say it was an accident born out of the COVID situation, that because of the COVID, we realize more closely of the connections that uh, we are having with um, other people, and it is truly like interconnected, like uh, um, the how to build a better well-being, it's rely upon like the connections with all different stakeholders. I remember there's when we are trying to, you know, recruit new team members in our team, and there's a student applicant who's this student, they she or he like applied it first, but then later she like withdrawn her application because she kind of found out that, oh, you are collaborating with some religious groups that doesn't fall into my own, you know, religious faith. And so that she think that by joining us will kind of be a betrayal of her own religious belief. But actually, we are not only just collaborating with one particular group, we are collaborating with a diversified NGOs with different religious beliefs or non-religious groups. So what I'm trying to say here is not to say that uh, it's not to say this particular case, but to say that like um, like like a more universal values of caring others should actually cross the boundaries of faith or countries or race or different things. Like when of course this person, she can, you know, seek out to other organizations that speak more to her own values. But what I'm trying to say here is sometimes we might easily just set out the boundaries, and then to narrow the scope of what it means to be like caring and collective prosperity. Um, but I guess from these projects, Jennifer and I also learn a lot about like how to really, you know, expand the scope of self and community, and so that the care can be, you know, expanded the scope as well, that can transcend a lot of different barriers.
Thank you, Luna. That's interesting, and I think in particular you've been speaking about you know, collaboration, you know, and how that connects to this idea and how it's essential for this development of collective prosperity. Hori, I wonder, you know, in your introduction you spoke a lot about partnerships, and I wonder whether you can speak to how those came to be and how those connect to this idea of collective prosperity.
Kia ora, Mason. Tēnā tātou. Two things, partnerships and relationships. They're very different, and you need to understand what they mean. Partnerships is the business. That's why we've come together, you and I, Mason. We've got an agreement to do something. It's a business, we understand, that's why we've come together. Relationships is around the trust and confidence, and trust is built with three things: reliability, credibility, and intimacy. When you develop a relationship with somebody, those three things must be there, and you must understand that they're there, and you must work hard to try and develop them. And by the way, everyone, relationships comes before partnerships. I learned that very quickly in the police. The police would go out to the community and ask the community's help. We'd drop all our files and issues on top of them, give them nothing to resource and expect them to fix things. I changed that psyche the other way around, and some of the bosses didn't like it because they thought it was an handy-pandy conversation, and we're here to fix a burglary problem. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, Nathan. You need to know what order it all goes in, and you need to understand and sign up to those two different parts. You hear partnership being bandied around in just about every government strategy and maybe all of ours too. But if you ask people what it really means, I'd suggest to you that a lot of them would struggle to tell you what it actually means. And then if you ask them, where does the relationship fit inside of that, they'd get lost. Can I just touch on a couple of other things too? I think it's important. Look, for me, our country is built on one treaty, two people, many faces, a beautiful country, and the All Blacks. And that needs to be the foundations of any constitutional write-up, whatever you look at, whether you're brown, purple, or pink. Okay, if you start from the top, we all know we have a Treaty of Waitangi that was signed in good faith by two people. Okay, after that, the lawyers, the priests, the clergy all got in the way, and there's about 10 different versions of that. But if you think about it, we're many people because we welcome manuhiri here to this whenua to live, to prosper, and to support one another within the community. And we're having a big conversation now. A beautiful country, well, of course, you can't argue with that. Now, those of you who haven't been up and down the country, you need to. There'll be some that I know have been all over the world and haven't seen Queenstown or Invercargill, have gone down to Stewart Island. And that's what you need to do. The All Blacks, well, in my respectful opinion, that's the only time we seem to be quite open about who we are, why we are, where we are, and what we do. I don't have an answer for that, everybody. That's another conference. But I just thought I'd put that there to you all. That's my position on things. So I am right down the middle, but at the same time, acknowledging the work that my ancestors did when they turned up to sign the treaty. Not everybody did. And I just talk briefly on the food. The food needs to be the next step. Food needs to come with the conversation after the food. It can't just be the food on its own. And I made that clear in a couple of huis and whānau meetings that I've been to. And look, it might sound simple. It might sound very easy. But the food needs to come with the conversation after. What next? How can I help you? You've been coming here for the last 3 months. It's the same thing. What do we need to do? What's different? The last part, if I can, Nazan, is talk about the inequity between the community group and the Crown. There's about a 30% difference in pay and resources just about across the board. Yet the heavy lifting is being done by the community sector at the request of the Crown. That is not right, and it is not equitable. And I'm saying to you all, as community workers, we have got what we got because partly of that. Okay, there's a lot of talent in the Crown, but if you ask me what it is that they're achieving for whatever that they're doing, they would struggle to tell you. In fact, they would point you to a relationship and partnership that they may have with one of you. So without the community, they don't know where they're going. I'm only putting that up there, tātou mā, in the context of this conversation around the pandemic, poverty, Maori, where we are now and where we're heading. It is not going to get better for us in a hurry, simply because the inequity between the Crown and the community groups is just not right. And I'm saying that respectfully to you all because I know that you're doing what you're doing because you enjoy helping people. You won't have a lot in your bank account. In fact, you're relying on your neighbour next door to give you what you need to get. But that's not right. And I'm suggesting that whānau, in the context of prosperity and collaboration, those things there need to be front of mind when it comes to thinking, shucks, what's my next step? That treaty framework that I've given you, some people have a problem with it. I don't, because it's explainable. So thank you, Nathan. I don't know if I've answered your question. Actually, I forgot. I forgot what your question was, but I just wanted to get that out in the context of sharing and kai. There needs to be a conversation that follows the food. Kia ora.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, so onto the next step. You know, you can't have the conversation without the food, shouldn't have the food without the conversation. And that's in some ways, it's a very good explanation of what collective prosperity is, because it shouldn't be just the social progress without some of the material progress. It shouldn't be the spiritual progress without the other. Material and spiritual progress go hand in hand, right? And I think we are in many ways lucky to be in this country where there's so much wealth in principles that Maori have brought us, that kind of lay a foundation for how we should build society, that many countries just simply miss. They lack because they don't have these deeper roots or haven't explored them enough. You know, I think that there's no greater bounty for any person than to become a cause of peace and well-being, you know, and for those around me, a source of social good, right? So to round this short panel off, I wonder whether I could ask each of you to point us to how we can make an impact, whether this supporting an organization, your organization, other organizations, whether it's something that you feel we should do in our personal lives, whether it's a shift of perspective we should take, something else, or all of the above. But it would be great if we can do like a lightning round. Each of you just take a minute, share with us as an audience what to leave us with. Jennifer, maybe you would like to go first.
I think maybe our perspective could be a bit different because we have very limited experience in these fields, but then we're also just been exposed to this greater world to explore so many different opportunities. But from that view, I think maybe I'll phrase it as one of my takeaways from doing what we've been doing as catering care when we talk about what we can do to promote this. I think for me, it's definitely to keep an open mind about what you can do. Because as Lunar mentioned before, she wasn't very sensitive to social issues before she started catering care. And for me, when I first joined, it was a first step for me as well. But it was certainly a steep learning curve for me. But actually looking back when we were preparing for this panel, it was astonishing to see how much we've achieved. Yeah, so maybe to just not to be so intimidated in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, don't be intimidated. Go forward.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Huri, what's your view?
Collaboration is the first and only word that comes to my mind. Nazim, there's really no other word I'd like to put on the table. I think we've all had experiences where we've had to lead some very challenging situations. I'm no different. The other thing too, inside of the collaboration is your style of leadership. Understand your own self, understand what your leadership skills are, and actually too, Whānau, knowing when it's time for you to step out and let somebody else take a role. You know, when you get to a point where you're trying to break down the wall with a hammer, sometimes you need to give the hammer to someone else or get a new hammer. Sometimes some of our leaders don't quite understand what that needs to look like, and before you know it, you're going in the wrong direction really fast. Inside a collaboration too, that means doing a lot more listening and talking. Look, I'm a talker. I love to talk. But at the end of the day, you've just got to know when to shut your gob and just let people. The more ideas you have on the table, the better off you're going to be with people feeling like they've contributed to something. I had two of those big experiences this morning with MSD, Taumata Kōrero. So that's what I'd like to leave as a final message. Collaboration is the big word. Believe it or not, if you ask me how to spell it really quickly, I probably couldn't tell you. but I know what it means, and you get so much satisfaction when things happen, and you've just been a part of it. But your part was, now you need to step back and let somebody else do the job. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Uri. So Helen, I asked you way in the beginning to help us to shine a light into how we can get to collective prosperity. Please do.
I genuinely believe that our human DNA makes us for relationship. We're meant to be in relationship. And this conversation, and I think listening to both Luna and Jennifer and Hurimoana, reminds me of, I would almost use this word, obligation, to step out into relationship with people who are different than us, and particularly those who are suffering. And in that relationship, stuff happens. Because I cannot help but be affected, and then that creates a whole series of actions and thoughts. And so it's picking up a little bit on what Luna and Jennifer were saying about to not be intimidated, and gosh, how far they've actually come, and that neither of you had a great intention to do this, yet you did. Because you saw and you responded. And I think it picks up a little bit what Huri was saying about collaboration, which essentially or one way of framing that is about an us. How are we together in relationship? So if there's any light, Naishan, it's definitely about us, and it's about a spirit of service of each other.
Thank you so much, Helen. And thank you to all of you. Unfortunately, this panel is only an hour long, and we've gone just over that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you so much to Luna, Jennifer, Helen, and Hurimoana for joining us. Really, it's been incredible hearing from you, your work, your insights, your experiences. I believe that Emily will send out, or somebody will send out some links to these organizations, so you can follow up and read a little bit more about each of them, because there's a lot that I got to do in my pre-reading to just kind of skim the surface and not even get to, you know, the depth of insight that you guys have built up with your work. So please dig in, friends, and learn more about these three panelists and their work. And beyond that, have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope this has given you and all of us some more insight into what this thing called collective prosperity is and how we can all get there. Thank you so much.